sometimes we forget, like, because you're students here, that you're part of the Polar community. And I think I want you to know that you are. And not only just to receive, but to contribute. So thank you for that. And I love what the chapel team does. And sensitivities that come from that. So, and I was also thinking as I was sitting there, like, we do so much ministry for people, like in teaching, what I mean? We're always giving. Like, I think it's hard for us just to actually receive. So I hope you just felt the freedom to receive. So we're back. Thank you for that. So I want to take the time that we have. We'll see how far we get. I was telling Andy this morning, I think I'm like, wow, I have a lot of slides. I don't know how that happened. So no offense, I just not to freak you out or anything. But I want to take some time to talk about a subject that has come up in a lot of our conversations, and just this idea of teaching and learning. Some of us feel really comfortable with it. Some of us are discovering more about learner-centered teaching, but I want to integrate it a bit with some research by a newer research called Springtide Research. So a guy that runs it, his name's Josh. He and I have become friends, which is great, and he's become a good friend of FYI. They've done some great research on just especially with Gen Z, and just thinking about that. And so I kind of want to highlight a bit of their research and try to integrate that with some of the work learning that we've done as well. So, there's a technique of teaching and learning, but then there's also just this idea of research, of really understanding, well, who is the learner that we're actually trying to teach, right? Specifically, but also more generally as well. And so hoping that we can maybe jump into that and think about that. But where I want to start, and this, so I'm going to break you up in little small groups here for a second, is I want you to share with some of your friends this. Share one of your best learning experiences. I don't care how far back you go. Like, you could go back to kindergarten, preschool, whatever you call it, and you go back to like yesterday. I don't really care. But I want you to just take a minute and think about that. And I'll give you a minute. You can kind of think about it. But then I want you to get in groups of like 3 or 4 or something. And let's not leave the room because this won't be long. But I'd love you to just take some time and share that with each other and find out like what's similar or what's not. Okay. So I'll give you like 2 minutes just quietly. It's always nice to just kind of collect our thoughts. We just came back. Just take 2 minutes by yourself, and then we'll break up into groups. And I want you to answer this question. Okay, so 2 minutes, go.
Are we talking like formal classroom experiences, or?
I think it can be any.
Great.
Yes, it can be broader than classroom. Great clarifying question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Got it. 2-minute drill. We're staying here.
Yes, I give you.
Yeah. So, what are you guys?
Yeah, when you're ready, just kind of huddle up, you know, maybe 3 or 4, whatever works.
I remember
Huddle
one of my
together.
most vivid
Take some time to share your
teaching
story.
was I was in my junior year of high school, Mr. Sullivan's class. It was a government, U.S. history sort of class, and the way our classroom was set up, it was like he would be in the front. We had section here, section here, section here of desks. We were all kind of facing each other. And he got up and he assigned this like paper that was like helping him just for like 16, 17-year-olds everywhere. He was like, write a 10-page single space paper like on whatever topic it was that he chose, and he's like, you have like 4 days to write this thing. Like, read 10 sources, all this sort of stuff. And we were like,
We want to teach you how to do this. So
no, this is not on the syllabus. And they're assigning this to us, like, but nobody said anything about it. Until my sweet friend Vanessa, one of my best friends in high school, like, started saying like, Sullivan, it's not fair.
I think the reason why
Like they had this whole thing worked out between them. We were learning about like unions being created and unfair working and living conditions that people were in. How like nobody wanted to speak up about like the unfair conditions that people did. Like they would get in huge trouble. So like they had this dialogue for a long time, like going back and forth, like fighting with each other. And then another student popped in, he wasn't a part of the experiment. It was kind of like he would be the one to jump in and be a part of it. And he like started, and they were like, I mean, my friend Vanessa, like I don't think has ever said a cuss word in her life.
So that was what for me.
Full into it, and he like sent him out into the hallway, and like gave us this whole like don't talk back to me whole thing. And they went out in the hallway for like 5 minutes, and we were all just like, what do we do now? Like, nobody really talked. Like we were all like freaked out about this, and then they come back in and they're all like laughing about the situation. And so it was like a whole like play thing to like talk about what it was like for people who spoke up against people in power and sorts of moments where unions were starting to form and how people like it was one of those very vivid moments that I just remember what that could have, like that just feeling what those people could have felt.
Yeah. So very self-directed in the objectives of the
treated by
what you wanted to like.
it was just very vivid. Yeah.
Some people had like
I was like 16 or 17, like a junior in high school.
Yeah.
I just had that. I never done that. I never had that. Cheaper reviews, like great. I get a grade.
Right.
One class
I had a professor here.
So the reason I like it, first of all, it brings me from academic world to more practical, talking about the research. Also introduces a lot of
I took it as like a
questions.
description.
Right.
Also, one
Right.
thing I like,
So in college,
just
My favorite class.
spend Saturday, go to 2 gardens near the town, just a whole day
I had a hard time
silent.
grabbing on specific
So I enjoy. That's one of the best assignments. That's really not just know all the factors, but just put into practice. Give me something open up, understand myself, to God. Yeah, so that's one learning experience. I don't know.
Yeah, just go to a mall. Like, go to a mall, walk around,
He didn't when that happens.
Last week for me, I don't want to recommend. Yeah, so I will go
Two teaching experiences. One was when I was very charismatic, very loud, very, and just like you hung on every word he said. And he came in like, I'm going to teach you history. We were talking about school, like, so he, coming from a very fundamental kind of Christian school, going into that, where I'm learning, growing up, but then to hear like all the different different angles.
Failure is a
like
great way to
different
learn.
things going on. He just was very captivating.
I think for me,
the other one was when I was in
academically,
seminary.
of course, I think
Coming from
this
the kind of background I
cohort,
came from, very
getting
teaching
my
oriented
doctorate, that journey,
teaching where it was like
the
technically
way that our
everybody else was
cohorts are
taught
set up
when I was in seminary. I mean, they presented ideas, and then when I remember in one class, like, well, which one's the right one? Why are the others wrong? It's like, no,
They
it's
don't
not
tell
like
you
that.
about it
No,
going
they
in.
don't.
Actually figure it out yourself. That was my first
but
what is that? Learner-centered teaching.
You
Where I was
can-
like,
and
I was forced to think, wrestle with it for myself. And that was really mind-blowing because it's like coming from a more evangelical background, it was like you didn't think, it was you were just told what
Right.
you believed and why all the other options were wrong.
just learning from the other leaders and that, but then being challenged to learn
Wrestle with ideas.
Yeah, we start
One right way that I was brought up believing.
thinker, as a writer,
Maybe other ways of looking at this and other angles and stuff like that.
Why do you think it's one?
And I remember when I
think, you know, the
Marco always gave us permission.
initiative analysis, like how you
Hear other
there's
people.
no get together.
You're not used to it.
just got people like
Like, don't go to
like
Nathan.
Brad Griffin,
Agree with
every
them.
kind of
Go here, beat
brand.
come in with a different angle and wrestle
But then,
with
so do we.
I think it was.
I kind of started my journey down being a little bit more.
I think that's the
Just
cool
looking,
thing
you know,
about
I'm conservative.
that learning, this learning experience. And I think that's, to me, that's been my best learning
Yeah.
academically.
Together.
Undergraduate fun,
Yeah, I think
master's degree.
where the fun is either the content or
That was literally,
the teacher. I think
I was
during
doing
the
that.
but it kind of seemed like there was one teacher.
The
charisma of the teacher's passion to throw in the subject. And the content though was
chore that I know that I did. But you had these
I know.
people,
right? So that was
Somebody
really
did.
really
Put that much into it.
Today's, it's interesting because today's
Right around.
Doctoral experience.
he would have been like,
Specifically about.
he did a lot of stuff about teaching history from the angle of kind of white guilt.
I think that there's like
That was the
a
first time I ever walked up
larger
to
story, there's like
class.
a connectedness to
Like the people that
an other person.
that are like my generation, my people are did some
Right,
horrible
like
things.
mine was
That's the
the
first time I ever felt
1930s,
like white guilt. But then I
working community.
As I process it,
That
you
was
know,
just
it's important to
somebody's
understand our history.
history and like there's just
But
a
it-
like an
but from a
empathy
Christian
or a
point of
connectedness
view,
or
there's gotta be a redemptive angle.
no, we'll never
How can
fully
we
experience what that was like. There was like a glimpse into
How can we, you know,
Okay.
be
How
we
all
I've done a lot of,
So it was interesting. It was interesting because it's like where we're at today is very different than the way it was back in the '80s. But he came at it
higher up.
And then to do
very
that.
passionate about Malcolm X
From the opposite end.
and what happened to the Indians, all that, and all that stuff. Wow.
It's hard to
Like,
Wrap my head around it. I never was taught that in
red line.
high school.
And I still balance out if I don't have to.
My mom told me that what did you do?
Interesting.
And with yours, Steve, it sounds so much like I think the mall experience would be really neat, right? Because we all kind of you always like to people watch, you know, you're always in that mentality, but if you're like, oh, this is kind of like an assignment, like I'm intentionally supposed to think a little bit more, like, and ask a deeper question as to, you know, what's really going on here, or what are the things that I'm noticing in the real world, as you say, it's pop culture and media or whatever, like that's the content. Don't just take in what's around you, filter it, and kind of what you're thinking about and learning, right? So, yeah, so it's really applied and very practical to life kind of thing. I remember I always struggled with figuring out was this relevant to my existence, right? But when I was younger, that was obviously their ego sense because I was. How is this relevant to me? I don't need to know it. And that was kind of the attitude, right? But then as as you realize, you're like, well, it's important that actually I know other people's perspectives and a deeper sense of what's going on. And just because it doesn't interest me doesn't mean I don't need to know about it. Actually, maybe should know about it because it, you know, it informs a larger worldview than something so, you know, individualistic, right?
It's all about.
But it's something I can read seminary. That's good quality
Yeah,
of things, and you're like, all right, so takes kind of, and it's like, well, that's not for me to choose, right? Like you gotta, you know, but being able to read what the thing is, so that I can realize that's much than that, and that's what makes it so interesting and amazing, really, right? Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, those ones probably. Again, because it's the kind of it was like find joy there.
Yeah, completely. And putting the emphasis on practice, right? And taking but applying it in industry, right? There's definitely a on the application of what we're learning, right? And I think Steve's done really well to help us recognize and encourage that.
I know.
Ministries that
We'll
were
touch on like trick.
I thought of one story.
One thing to learn about theories, about race relations or cultural contextualization, or about how to write a dissertation or whatever that experience is, or you can learn about all those things, but until you like actually experience it in a different way, it just wouldn't be as informative.
What are you doing? Does anybody need more time to share?
Anyway,
Okay, good. Keep these stories in mind. Now I want to ask you another question. You can share with each other, all right? If you need a minute in your group to be quiet, that would be great. Don't feel like you need it. It doesn't seem like you do. You're all pretty loud right now. Here's the question. Share one of your best teaching experiences. Okay, think about a time that you've been the teacher. What's been the best experience?
Well, yeah.
How long do we have? Yeah, you have the next hour. So yeah, share about that experience and what was so great about it. Like, you know, I mean, do that. Okay, so if you need a minute to think about it, you know, curate your top 10 down to 1. If you can do that, that would be great. Okay. So take a minute to do that and start sharing with each other.
Yeah, I guess it's related. I feel like it was
So something I've been
it was this neat moment around just like a hand. They were working on some kind of assignment. But I remember talking about I got the name and how teacher has regular, right?
And
so she did
one of our
Chinese letters
this morning he comes out and was like,
and I was like, you're pretty good, right? She started laughing.
definitely not the worst I've like ever
Right?
but it was
And
like,
another kid
I was like, this
why don't you guys try? Right? So we then sat around with the
and
these Chinese
then
characters.
we had
But as I thought about it later, that I kind of
like, you know, like, but if you have a cover of like, this was the last one you've ever done, and then we talk about a little, that was
maybe not ours with the language,
someone, like,
was not my
character turn. So then
a little bit more than I was pretty a part of things. And it was neat to see the kids around the table. All of us had kind of realized like they were all engaged in for something that was so unique and fulfilling to so many of them. That it really brought her in. So yeah, that's a story that's showed up through this last few years.
I think one that I did this past summer, we do like a local mission trip with like a couple different
Whenever I
churches
can
out of our
take
church in
experience
Chicago,
or have
and our entire theme for the week was
every night.
how do we as Christians rise
My
and
question
shine?
always is, where do
World
you
full of
see
hate,
that
how do we be
today?
a light? And so we kind of done this whole thing of like walking through some stories in
Feel the
scripture. And the last night was the text of the Hill, and talking about like what we don't really understand, like the text of the Hill and how important
It's
that was.
interesting because we do that every day.
The wilderness back in the day, like made a wrong turn, like seeing a city out in the distance, like you might have food on water, and seeing how important that was. And so we just like handed everybody like a candle in that space, said like there's just one light off on the distance, like hard for somebody to see that, especially like.
I tried that last Sunday.
And then we just kind of started lighting everyone's
I
candles
forget where I was at. Somebody said,
together.
I was talking to students about
On a hill.
enjoy junket cheese. Enjoy this week. Was it just
Long afterwards, everybody's going to hell out of the candle. Like, it's just to like watch
Giving
people
the invitation.
sit there even after our service.
Guys, I
Like,
think that I am
like,
afraid that be looking for that.
this is an
In
interesting,
the
like
context
almost
of
sacred
like,
experience.
whether it's
Like all sit
family related
with the candles, looking at each other, or just seeing each
I'm
other
trying
as
to-
like safe
I
people.
mean, I like the opportunities where I can.
Or when we go out, like discern what the people that are around us. It was just, it was really like beautiful, powerful, like sacred moment.
How he's impacted them and what does that mean then?
One of my favorite moments, I think.
I was gonna say missions or like the retreat weekends or something that we do. Again, so to me it comes back to something immersive, right? And it's beyond the you can have the extended time. I find that oftentimes it's not the plan. Obviously, are most memorable, but I think it's just in those moments that are so highly teachable and memorable. But it's because they've been able to connect the dots really over a period of time together and be in a relational kind of setting. So yeah.
And it is, to that, on mission specifically, we always have a plan to. We always ask the same question, where'd you be? Ready for see a gap where we need they're like, I don't know, but those, they're bringing, they're yeah, I very rarely get on after a 20-minute talk and have the same like,
Yeah.
and I'm sure I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your first impression?
Yeah.
How's the fight? How does this? Them living the story, or them sitting with the weight of like it feels like
I'm like,
it
why
feels
not?
like a success. Which one?
I know.
What's the right thing? Give me the space. Let's win this thing.
And usually from the word, and like, for example, this last year.
Did you have others? We kind of cut you off.
No, I didn't have others necessarily. I guess I was thinking from
One-on-one relationships.
I think sometimes some of the ones
Walking with young people, whether it's young adults or
like the content itself a little bit we talked about from perspective where you can
no,
where you
Now
can
we
push the
live,
boundaries
and we have been walking around.
of what people think is kind of
few occasions where I've
I
had,
don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess like it's real. I'm thinking about art. Like we did a sermon.
like when I was pastoring a church, I got back to my That was
like preaching about it as it was just having a conversation with someone, bringing some things, and we got a lot of real positive feedback from it. It really engaged. I didn't preach in that sermon series. Our team did, but but it was really engaging time. And I think that's what I did oh, can I ask? Kind of full of books. FYI, about yeah, I think our youth group went through that. Our youth pastor did like a podcast, a chapter, and we talk about it, and then we kind of tried to filter it into the parents as well, and get a book for the family. Hey, listen, that's if your kid. And we didn't get that going in with this podcast thing, but
late night conversations that happen.
But if you open it up as a just ask a bunch of questions that you might be thinking about, but you're like, I would never ask that in my group or in my class or at the church. But given those teaching experiences, you kind of let's push a boundary, let's expand out God's grace and goodness a little bit to say this may be uncomfortable, but you know, we're kind of wrestling with it. So I think sometimes that's what group is content. Gathering together. Good but again, it's not that bank here are the facts on it, inherit it or regurgitate it back to other people. Like here's something that really like and learn and grow as a person, right? And every time I teach or preach, that's oh my goodness, I learn so much more. I think that sometimes what I deliver to people, right? That's up to God, but the work happens in me for sure.
Came in. Testing on this. This is the answer to that really beautiful guy. But for years, but in the last few years, we hired as our new middle school director, which has been really special. It's like a journey. Yeah, he was on the fence of like either leading grades or just ending. Well, learn during the grades.
I got one like that. I almost can see myself passing on like part of the
so I get to have a lot of sitting and coaching parts of it where it's teaching, but it's teaching apprenticeship.
Yeah. Sure, I can
Watching her.
I foster plans. And I had wherewithal. It was also really
And in so many ways, I think that's you raise a good point with teaching. Literally go like regular find teaching ideas, mentorship, for example, right? Being willing to step aside and give someone else an opportunity, right?
It was spontaneous.
Walking through the park with in the box, right? Like, examples by the way that, you know, someone lives their lives, learn that advice is taking them live out, you know, kind of what they believe. There's so many teachable moments. I wonder in everyday life, like I think about that with parents.
Jay, you're trying to figure out what did we do to get to that point, not how do we get to that point all the time, and then try to abrogate it.
No, right.
Totally built here.
Sure. The words in the lectures are but I think what's important is sometimes the example of it. We've talked about technology, right? You can't be on your screen all the time, right? And then here we are as parents. You know,
I know.
You gotta limit your screen time. Let me turn it off. Kind of thing.
what we had on like Monday, I think somebody said it of, or maybe it was you or somebody said it of like usually the person talking is the one that's
Playing a game or something, right?
yeah.
Classic ministers. You have your leaders do attendance on their phone. Kids get
Unless you talk to
Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
Doing attendance. I like when the conversation's going
right now. But then some of your small leaders probably do have like 2 little tabs open or something. Right?
I try to get them to like use their phone, like get the Bible app and
just the things that like allow kids to feel like
oh, thank you.
Technically, it's
Technically.
we did this like one where it was like
Well, I mean, we know that that's Christian education.
everything's breaking down to questions that we're gonna go through them kind of thing. We've done like little tiny questions and so like
Yeah.
shout out this one night where they like laid them out.
Yeah, because I think.
Yes, yes, that's exactly right.
And then they got a question, I got 60
I really
seconds.
follow it. Yeah.
And so like they felt like they were like we're choosing which one and that off the top of Jeremy's head. Yeah.
With.
I prep for all, but like guys chose.
They missed the whole day.
And that's okay. And it's okay that they miss details, but at least they need to know the story. Yeah.
We can read it.
But his work on racial justice and racial is really good, right?
I didn't expect to get
Really strong.
So it's HARK.
That's what makes good teaching.
Dee brings her own dry erase marker all the way from Australia. I don't understand why, but it saved my day. That's great. Okay, it sounds like you were talking about some things. You had a great learning experience, you had a great teaching experience. So I want you to stay in your groups, and I want you to go meta again, and I want you to think and try to answer this question. What makes good teaching and learning? What themes did you hear in your own stories? What would be some of the things that you would say are essential or really important? And again, we can't cover it all. You can't be exhaustive. Maybe in your own experiences. What did you hear that were common some themes? I think we already started to do that in our group a little bit. So take a minute to do that. What's that?
We finished.
Oh well, yeah, you were the Fantastic. We'll be done. We'll just go to lunch. That'll be great. Okay, so take a minute and talk about that.
Anyone want to add anything?
Totally. You guys go ahead. You guys go ahead.
One thing that I talked about some of the things that you were page again. I think there was like a
Curiosity.
there's always a element of like not trying to control it too much. You know, just like I don't know, going with the flux.
Trying to get the experience.
I love it.
Yeah, it's like
You walking through the park and taking out the trash.
right.
That's half of
There's
it.
just something I don't even know how to say.
Well,
It's like something mysterious that like you don't plan for that happens. Out of trying to create an experience, something kind of happen.
Life, right?
I don't know what the word is. But I'm
Yeah, so I think
looking
of
for there, but
partnership, I think, right?
Learning.
Well, and I think openness, right? You talk about that idea of
yeah, I know.
not narrow.
Yeah, come back. Let me work through my head a little bit. Yeah,
Maybe that's related to curiosity, but
yeah.
I think there's maybe a correlation between the curiosity and the openness. New ways of seeing things. Obviously, that's what learning has to be. If you're not curious, like you're not willing to try something new, you're not going to learn, right? And I think that one thing we didn't touch on in our stories is perseverance.
Like especially
Right? It doesn't happen. You know, again, I'm thinking of my parenting, been working with kids.
and like you just
How many
sit there with
times
like a piece of paper and
One
we're
of the things
name on it.
said that,
when
and
you,
it
like,
just doesn't seem to
insert
sink
something
in.
good,
And then at some point, some student comes
I
up
feel like constantly people are trying to buy outside.
Just Okay, yeah, like somehow it landed, but if you didn't just persevere,
Yeah.
So we was already over that. Expected. Just showing up. Experience of like how many middle school lunches we sat through the crashes like as juniors. Because you kept showing up.
And like like church, I was previously at, like they.
Brilliant.
And it was one of those situations where you get a youth pastor 2 or 3 weeks and it's not growing the way they want to grow your house. What they, I mean, and that's the thing with electrical on me. I was like, you realize what you're doing.
And then the fun.
They're never gonna attack you. You know, if you don't give the youth
I was kind of.
go with it for the long haul. I mean, I had a kid come up to me the first when I landed there. It was like, how long you and I didn't know I was that caught me off guard. When I got let go, I was like,
Yeah.
there's nothing I could do. Yeah, the long suffering, because I did this tree and I think a lot of years. And it's been a really, you're right. And I've been with kids that have gone all the way from 7th grade to 12th grade and college and stuff.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, the analogy that's coming to mind is like, there's like we got a sandbox for my daughter not too long ago. And one of the things that we're really trying to work out as parents is like,
you can
don't interrupt them when they're playing. Let them good what happens. And so like, she'll ask everybody sometimes like, hey, play on the sandbox with me. And I'm like, no, I want you to, and she'll ask a couple of times, but then she'll just play. Like to watch her like create a 3-tiered like cake out of these like sand things. Sometimes like try to build a tunnel. Or, like, I don't know, it feels like in those moments that I've had really powerful meaningful.
So you look at how Steve.
You don't know what's going to happen. A million different things can happen in the sandbox. Just like letting people explore kind of what's in the.
I've had arrogant teachers before,
right? Kind of let the unexpected happen. You don't know what'll happen as a teacher in those spaces.
Right.
That's probably the best analogy I can come up with. What I was thinking about. I'm just like, yeah, setting the boundaries, but then just letting people explore what happens.
Only God questions
on any given day,
and just being engaged at what happens. Any number of things can happen.
I don't want
great. Keep thinking on that, even if you know you need to read rest.
Yeah. Like the ability for kids to feel like, okay, I know.
Yeah, I know what to say.
Like working in that way
by learning, personally encouraged and motivated in that way.
Connecting how they can serve.
Yeah, I was thinking
I try to make teaching also very, where it's just not me lecturing and banking, you know, but here's a video, here's somebody has a testimony, and it just kind of makes it.
Yeah, even being there like in moments. Oh, Catholic wants all together. Okay, well,
give a 20-minute
like, well, add some water to
expository.
or like make it, then just letting her go again. And explore. Learn different things. I can do something with that. I can build something bigger and stronger.
They're always hitting the same engagement, learning style. What about the
Is it creativity? We talked about that, like creative structuring and different elements of performance.
And they're part of the learning process. So like what we're doing is now.
But yeah, I'm thinking of something like, small thing. They've been taking restriction, but it's one thing to be creative. I feel like sometimes when things well to be creative is to put with a YouTube clip or a sound bite or something. And that's the extent that our creativity goes, right? To make it relevant, like I'll just I'll use a movie clip in my kitchen. But you use a movie clip from like YouTube or something like kids are like, what?
I know.
So there is a way that you can be creative.
That's only great.
Yeah, which, I mean, some of them are iconic, so you can get away with it, right? But yeah, but creativity isn't just like a whimsical idea. I think it's a well thought out.
Right.
Like it really has to be intentional. And when you use technology, so we did like a alternative worship night at youth together, which we like to do over at Toronto. So you don't just like focus, but it's usually centered around prayer. Had these prayer, walk through prayer stuff, and there was a couple of boards that they could either kind of pray by themselves, or they could go up and write words on boards.
Oh yeah, it's a
or whatever. It's called age. But on the one hand, it was like,
she's
okay,
really
this
like
good, it'll get
discovered
some
her
students really
personality and her likes and dislikes.
and satiated. But there
Yeah,
has to
yeah.
be something just make it happen. Not just, oh, that's a good creative element to throw in. But I might get a picture.
Yep. My daughter loves art and she loves outside. Like those are the two
Sometimes
things that
creativity is
she.
more than
I think we've also realized like that. Yeah, athletic probably makes a lot of work. She loves being with people, but like I think she loves like the arts side way more.
Good teaching and learning requires non-distraction.
So what makes good teaching and learning? What were some of the themes or characteristics or images? He's not writing all the answers. She's volunteered to write down our answers. So thank you for that. Yeah, what did you talk about? What came up in your conversations?
Anti-capitalism.
Excellent.
Would you say fight the power?
The power.
Wow, we are starting strong. Okay. Yeah. What else?
So I was gonna say, like, we talked a lot about investment and experience, like that the teacher is providing experience, but at an investment level. Like it's not just we're gonna create a fun thing, but it's you genuinely feel care, you feel like I'm understanding and going to learn, and that what the teacher is genuinely wants to see me grow for my own benefit. And so if it's just sterile and just a lecture, it's very difficult to feel that care. But if we're exploring and navigating themes and things like that, and you're on a journey and I'm with you on this journey, it transforms the learning process from school to true education.
Love it. Thanks, Drew. What else did your groups talk about? What themes came up? Images. Yeah, Jeremy.
We talked a little bit about how hard it is to tell as a teacher. Like there's sometimes where you're just like, oh man, I killed it today. Like that was so good. And like students could be there like, I didn't get anything out of that. Or you could like the very opposite where you're like that might have been one of the worst like messages I've ever given. And then someone's like sends you this like really nice message. Like, that was so meaningful. And so it's just like, there's so much in that like my intent is not what people receive. Like what I intend to say, like people bring their stories and their experiences right now and their circumstances and all this kind of stuff. And they might hear some of the words I say, but it might not be what I intend.
Yeah. Oh. So flip that around. So that seems like the negative side. So what is good teaching and learning then?
When I force my intent on people.
Okay. Yeah. So, but what is that? I mean, there's something there. I mean, what is it?
Well, I think that like there's an understanding of what people are bringing into the learning environment. So if I know that like, oh, this kid over here is struggling with this major thing at home, or is like dealing with something at school or whatever, being intentional with that, about the words that you say, the images that you pull, the stories that you tell, that speak to their situation in ways that they might actually hear what you're trying to put forward.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't know if there's a perfect translation of that, but something we talked about that is related, I think, is I don't know if it's patient or long suffering or steady, but like there's something that happens over time, and continuing to show up, and that's where when you the balance of the times I walk off stage, I'm like, that was great, and kids did vibe, or the opposite that you talk about. Over time, when you get to know your community, you build this rapport, and you just continue to show up and be there for your people, and you get to live together. You get to wonder together. You earn the right to have conversations.
I love that. I think were the three of you together?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've all been in your churches for a pretty long time. I mean, it would be interesting to reflect on how your teaching has morphed since when you began to where you are now. I think that's a really wise insight. Thank you for that. Yeah, what else? Yeah, Sam.
I think we felt really that he was like excellent PowerPoint transitions.
Yeah.
Flying boxes.
Feed, clip art.
Okay, great. Okay, good, Sam. Great. I'll just nod and affirm you.
We talked a lot about similar stuff really, but yeah, that the reciprocal nature of teacher learner and the journey, the process together.
Okay.
That actually.
Say more about reciprocal.
Yep, that's it. I mean, I said a little bit about this the other day, but like, so in my context, so ARCOR is a key thing around, like, you don't turn up as a lecturer to teach, you turn up as a lecturer to learn and hopefully to provide, but also learners are turning up to learn and to teach. And it's a totally reciprocal dynamic within a classroom environment. So yeah, I think like that for all of us really the same. Yeah, that's a pretty key dynamic. When we were thinking about a broad sense of teaching and learning, that reciprocal nature of that dynamic felt like it was sort of the key place where those felt best. But we had some questions about best. And what is best?
Yeah, and as we were talking about that and recognizing the relational aspect of teaching and learning, and we're talking about best and expectations and what does it mean for us to think about ministry and still using this kind of language? And what kind of expectations does it perhaps unfairly place onto how we minister to people, right? If we're thinking about whether or not a message or a lesson was effective, how do you even measure that, right? And we're talking about living life together, relational ministry, but we're still talking about it in terms of Bible study, Sunday school, Christian education. Like, does that really color the conversations we might have in terms of what teaching and learning should be in the ministry context?
Yeah, that's fair. It's fair. Best is an interesting word, and I mean, there's a value with that, but we didn't define the value, right? So I think that's an interesting thing to think about, right? So yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, Sarah.
I think the hope is the teacher to strike curiosity for everyone in the room. That becomes, if you move from curiosity to the word you said, you was self-directed, that you would want to know more on the subject or what you're trying to teach, and that you would breed empowerment, you would breed people getting up and moving and going somewhere, or applying that to their faith, or
Yeah, Sarah, appreciate that. Yeah.
I think oftentimes like a good teacher is one that has also been through that learning process, whatever the subject is, be it, biblical interpretation or how to roof a house. Like, I've found that to be a good teacher probably means you've needed to have that experience before. And not so that you can say this is how it needs to be done, but you can say I've been here before. I know what some of the speed bumps might be, or where this might get tough, but I will be here with you through it, so it's having that practical experience as opposed to just be able to say like, well, I've never I've never roofed a house, but here's, I can kind of tell you how to do this, or, yeah.
So there is an element of expertise.
Yeah.
That comes that I think is what seems what you're saying. I mean, experience and expertise. Right?
Yes.
We talked kind of about that, but also on the side of the learner, like having enough experience for prior understanding sort of related to the subject that they can understand what's being transferred to them. Whereas like if you have no concept or no prior connection to what is being taught, then it's just over your head, you don't learn anything. So enough of a prior connection, but also just pushing that a little bit further for both the teacher.
Love it.
We the word or the idea of experience came up a lot with our group as well, but I also think the responsibility of a good teacher is to cultivate a space that's conducive like for connection. So whether students connect to the experience of the teacher or whether they connect to one another's experience. I think we as a group decided like that produces memories or things that will last for, that'll be memorable. They won't remember what I did on a Sunday morning, but they might remember those points of connection.
Yeah, I like that. I like that phrase, points of connection. It's good. Yeah, jump on.
Kind of jumping back to Sam's point about learning with them. For all the educators out there, this is a word that you're like, oh, this is old news. But my wife was teaching me how she teaches, which she just started teaching me this after how many years. But I started employing this like Harkness method of teaching that's like very discussion based, very like student leading discussions. And one thing that I was surprised by it, and it kind of comes back even to like, did they like that? Did they not like it? Did they get something? Did they not? As they were leading the conversation in some ways and being guided by me, but I was able to see, oh, this is, I thought they needed to hear this, but they wanted to understand this, or they wanted to move in this direction. And so I think it gets back to some of the student led, I'm learning more about them than I ever have, because I'm letting them have a little bit of a say in where are we going together. And so I think personally, as the more I've given them a little bit of say in where are we going to go, I've learned like, oh, these are their needs and how can I step into those. And then just to jump off of Steve, I think there's a tension that when he said the longevity thing, and some people may have this more than others, but the tension of not having students long enough, like sometimes it feels like this message is my last message to them potentially. They might move in a week or two, or just the transient nature of my context specifically. But some other people might have that transient nature too. Of like you almost feel like you get one chance every week with them, and that might be your last chance. So what do I give them? I got to give them everything here because I don't have them for 4, 6, 7 years. I might only have them for a couple months, a year. What do I do?
Yeah, so
and that's like almost a pressure.
Yeah, pressure and attention of what that looks like. Right? Thanks. Yeah, Jesse.
I think good teaching often starts with like the teacher setting up the environment. So like kind of giving the sandbox that you're going to play in, a little bit of like framing the conversation. Okay, we're going to talk about good teaching and learning. And so kind of gives the principle or the idea of what we're going to be discussing, and then kind of sets the expectations around it. And so take some time and think on your own for a few minutes, and then in discussion groups, share what you thought. So kind of framing out the time of how the conversation is going to go, I think helps that idea of like, people don't have anything to say. Like, I'm going to ask the questions and they're not going to say anything. Well, if you let them think about it on their own and then discuss it with a couple peers, and then they have something to say to the larger group. Yeah. And so setting it up from the beginning, I think is important.
The setup is really crucial. Yeah, appreciate that, Jesse. Thanks.
Two words that stick out the most to me are it provokes for both the teacher and the learner, and it's very communal. Kind of what we talked about, but
no, those are good words.
There's the word vulnerability.
vulnerability begets like story sharing, testimony, invites the learner into something that's not just information being transmitted, but perhaps more information.
Yeah.
And that requires risk.
Yeah,
requires
vulnerability and risk. Yeah.
And that was something that came up in ours was like, how many times have we tried to get a student to come to know Jesus or like really get the gospel, or they were your all-star student and then 3 years down the road, they have no faith. Like you guys just went different paths or whatever. And that risk and vulnerability of like, do I want to risk again and reinvest into somebody else if that's a potential loss along the way?
So there's a risk with teacher as much as the learner.
Yeah.
I was thinking almost just more like the vulnerability, like I'm the one being paid to be here to teach. They trust, like I'm the one who went to get education.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna, it's like incarnational ministry of the Lord, I'm gonna be with the students.
Yeah.
Be vulnerable in that manner that like maybe I'm not the expert that they thought I was. Maybe my college students found out my deep paper, you know, whatever. Hey, I thought you get 100 on everything. You know, it was like, but there's something about taking a risk, like especially with the titles or the power dynamics that you hold, where you're really lowering yourself to be with some vulnerability. It's his full experience for the teacher.
Yeah.
Well, I think that goes with Gen Z's just general distrust for like people in authority. Like if someone says that I'm the authoritarian voice on this one thing, like it's like, well, I want to hear multiple voices. I want to bring together other discussion points too, you know?
So where is authority in teaching and learning? Does it matter? Does it exist?
Depends on what generation you are.
Well, we talked a little bit about culture, right? And about that in different cultures, those situations are different too, about authority and about respect and about your place in that hierarchy. And to take that into consideration when you're a teacher, about how different students perceive that different.
I think sometimes or go Sam.
Yeah, so as a student, I also think it's crucial to get constructive feedback. I'm not just receiving grades, but I can get the honest feedback, also support and care. Also, it's very important for me as a student during my learning experience. Yeah.
Point taken. No.
Great comment.
That's right. I think that's all about expectation. Like especially I feel like in the church world, I would argue, especially with Gen Z, like it's easy, I think, sometimes to think to balance out their feelings about authority, you need to like welcome all things, like all things are good and acceptable, and like, and how do you still push them and stretch them and like, so there has to be, I feel like, some level of expectation, and because then it brings a level of seriousness to like pull them into actually engaging, opposed to if it's just sort of like, well, whatever you think about this is like great, I'm just gonna like throw out an idea and you just take what you want from it. I think it's easy for it to then become kind of meaningless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Steve, I was thinking about authority and this idea of like investment even.
Yeah.
So like my favorite teachers as I reflect have been the ones that not just are, I mean, I don't think at certain ages I knew what a good teacher was, or like what am I, is it I'm gaining knowledge in the class, am I learning, but have been the ones that I'm like, I feel like they care about me in a way that's not just about how good this paragraph is that I wrote for them, or if I got this grade on a test. Like there's an investment in like almost in like a life, like they want you to. And so I think sometimes when I think about how I would want to lead or teach, it's like I want them to know I'm invested, and not that power comes from that, but a little bit of respect comes from they respect because they feel that this person is genuinely wanting something even more than just listen to what I have so you can get it in your head.
Yeah. It's good.
Go.
Yeah, like I think for me that question of authority, where does authority lie? For me, it's about. I think that the authority lies in the process of learning, from my perspective. So if there's a lecture, and teaching whatnot, if as someone doing that, I'm bringing my best and hopefully bringing the best that I can find in terms of content and material. But if that's actually encouraging students to then desire to learn, that's where the authority lies for me, like in their learning, in their desire to actually then carry on learning. It's not so much about the content, but about their desire to actually learn.
Yeah.
Maybe going off that, like, how do they gain mastery over it? How do they gain their own authority over the content, the ideas? And one approach, the banking, is like, I'm going to give them the answer, as the authority giver, versus them discovering it. Like, how do you, like, the authorities in the learning process, so that they hopefully discover and arrive at the answer themselves, so they can own it themselves.
It's really good. We should go to lunch in a minute. But I'm really grateful for this conversation. Pete, thanks for writing that down. I want to make sure they don't erase that. Like that last, they always come in here and erase the stuff on the board. I don't want that to happen. Did you find in your groups, like our group was sort of wrestling for the right words to try to understand what made a good teaching or learning experience a little bit, except for Sam's group. I guess you guys had now, but there's an elusiveness almost to what's there. There's a mystery a little bit to teaching and learning, and at the same time, there's something very technical. You all are in positions of authority where people are asking you to teach something, whatever we mean by teaching or what's going on there. And so I think we do have to wrestle with this issue of power, of authority, of evoking and the imaginations of our students, remaining learners ourselves, making sure that the power that we have is used appropriately. And so it's a pretty holy task, I think, what we're called to do. I find what's interesting is that when we think about the teacher and the student, that none of you really talked about programs or games or events or gimmicks or bribes or humor or charisma or quick fixes or one size fits all or threats, guilt and shame, unrealistic promises, information or technology as saving the teaching of learning, right?
Except for Chubby Bunny.
Except for Chubby Bunny, which, as you notice, is not on the list. But if you notice that a lot of times the default is, well, how do you get kids to learn? What's the trick? What's the gimmick? What's the curriculum? There's so much of that default there that I think the challenge that we have as teachers and learners is to transcend that and not allow this to get in the way or somehow substitute the work we do. And perhaps technology is the biggest temptation right now. Like if the PowerPoint or the keynote is good enough, like somehow I'm teaching. Like it doesn't even matter. Like, and like I'm constantly having to teach those that I work with. Like if you have too many words on a slide, you have to read it to get it. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much that is misunderstood about even the tools that we use. And perhaps maybe even the things that we're good at, our charisma or our ability to make students feel like we care about them. While that's important, it can take away from like actual teaching and learning experience of support and expectation and what comes with that as well. So there's an art to teaching that's more than what we hear in youth ministry a lot of times. Like they don't know, they don't care what you know until they know how much you care. That's true, and they actually do care about what you know. Like we actually have something to offer. I mean, that's why we do what we do, right? And it doesn't mean we're telling them, but it's certainly we come with something, right? Otherwise, like, why are we doing what we're doing, right? So there's this interesting dance that I think is happening with all this, which I think is really, really powerful. So the springtime, yeah.
Sorry, can I ask?
Yeah.
I get that those things aren't up here.
Yeah.
But all this in teaching and learning is expressed through things, right?
Certainly, yeah.
So
these aren't all bad, but if this isn't what's going to get us there. So I interrupted you.
Yeah, I think when you and I'm obviously focused on the classroom because that's the
Sure.
experience that I have.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is done so much better through better questions. So like the questions you ask can be
Yeah.
framed in really good ways.
Sure.
To express that.
Yes.
And to ignore that part of teaching and learning seems really significant to me.
To ignore what part?
The part where you actually implement it in the, oh, you're, to Jesse's point, you're aware of how you frame the conversation and the expectations to, you know, dismantle the power dynamics in the group.
Right.
And all that kind of thing. That is so essential to what teaching and learning actually is.
Absolutely.
Yes. We agree.
We're agreeing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm not saying it's juxtaposed. I mean, there's obviously the implementation that has to happen.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes we rely on the methods before we actually think about what we're trying to accomplish. The right program, if we just get kids here, the classroom where we you know, I don't know, we do something but we don't know why we're doing it. You know what I'm saying? Like I think it's sometimes we get enamored with technique, but we don't exactly know what the technique is for. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, but often it's the doing that shapes who we are, right?
Well,
like,
sure,
I'd rather my teachers were teaching well before they thought about why they were teaching.
Well, sure, yeah, but eventually we have to ask the question, whether it's administered teaching, like, what am I doing? Like, even if I'm good at it, like, what am I trying to accomplish, right? Like, if the goal is just for people to think that I'm a good teacher, that's not the point, right? The point would be like, we want them to like love learning, you know, be enamored, evoke their imagination or whatever. So, I'm in agreement with you. I think, right? Are we in agreement? Are we friends? No. But there's a skill, right? I mean, obviously, the things that we're talking about here have to like be implemented in some ways. I just don't want this to short circuit this because you know what I'm saying? Like what we remember in what's probably shaped us as teachers and learners is probably more that no matter what the technique is, though the technique might be really, really helpful. So,
well, so your subtitle is the pedagogical dance. I think it's this tension that we have to sit of the pedagogical and the praxis. Like, you know, do we need games to, here's my only attempt at saying games are good, to provide a space where kids can feel comfortable and find community and engagement and belonging in some ways so that it frames a space of equity. If the youth pastor is, you know, destroying kids at basketball, it might not create the space to allow for the conversation. But if it's a mutuality of playing basketball before youth group, that will provide when they go to small group that space to have a pedagogical.
Well, so I think we think about why we do what we do, because I could also make the argument that any sort of game has a winner and a loser. So why would we have that's never taught in the gospel, right? So we could almost use, depending on how we use games and the purposes of it and what we're trying to accomplish, we could actually use games as creating a competitive environment rather than a collaborative one. You know what I mean? So is it bad? No. But like, can we ask ourselves why what we're trying to accomplish other than, you know, kids just like, let's get them here with this or whatever. Yeah. So, you know what I mean? So I think this is the hard work we have to do of how do we create an environment that captures the qualities of what we have discovered through our teaching and learning, rather than just jumping to the means by which or you know, the attempts that we can get there. I think that's where we run into problems. And you know, I think the reason this is important to me is I just run into so many leaders that I train where they're just like, just tell me what to do. Like, what are the top things that we need to do to get kids to come or whatever, rather than actually thinking about, well, what's the experience you want them to have? What is the qualities that you're trying to form? What is the intent of your longevity with young people, the short or long, that matters, right? Do we need to preach on on a particular night, just, or is that just like expected of us? I mean, what's the reason for it? Like, I don't know about you, but like even at chapel today, I was waiting for someone to give a message.
I know, so
You
was
know,
I, yeah.
and I was actually critically thinking like, well, why did I expect that?
Yeah.
Like, was there not teaching and learning happening in the storytelling and in in the languages and in the liturgy that was happening in that moment, right? But why did I think like this isn't complete until somebody gets up and gives a message? Like, you know, why was that? Why did I think that? You know, I mean, I'm being really honest with you. And I don't think it was like, I thought the hour was great, like, but I kept looking at my watch going, wow, it's gonna be a really short message. That's what I was thinking in my head, right? Like, where did that come from, right? So, so I think this is the challenge that we have as teachers who are also learners, is to think about what do our students need? What are we actually communicating implicitly and explicitly in what we do? I'm going to hold you just because I want to send everybody to lunch for overtime. So what I want to do, it's going to happen tomorrow because we've got a great afternoon ahead of us. Is I want to talk about meaning making as through this study from the Springtide Research and the work that they did with Gen Z, some of the values and some of the things that they've talked about, and see if we can kind of couple and tie that into what we're learning here. So sound good? Great. So it's 12:12. Why don't we be back here at 1:15? Dr. Felicia Song will be here ready to go at 1:30. And so we want to be ready for her when she comes back. So if we can
I think what to have.
I'm gonna go for a pastrami sandwich. I'm gonna give it a go.
Okay.
See what all Jesse's hype is about.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some better shoes. I'm gonna run back to my.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm just gonna grab some in the back.
Okay.
See
the theme?
Yeah, so it's basically.
Yeah.